The reason I respect Louis Simmons so much is because of the fact that he never stopped learning or experimenting. And that's something that has to be addressed. I get people who, for whatever reasons, they don't like Louis Simmons. I've had people I know who don't like Louis Simmons, and they make these excuses. Well, I will never listen to a man who X or Y, right? It's always just nonsense. And here's the reality. When you look at what Louis Simmons did, and it's confusing because of the way he communicated, because he was always like, this is what works. This is what you have to do. If you do X, Y will happen. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. This works. And he came across in such a sure manner that people were like, well, wait, he changed it. I don't understand. He was so convincing. And that's because he had found what worked the best at that time, but he never stopped experimenting. And so it would throw people off. But when you look at Louis Simmons and you look at his mindset and the way that he did things, the man had already coached 50, 60, 70 world record holders in powerlifting. The man had rehabbed his low back and invented the reverse hyper. He was already then coaching stuff that was carrying over to the NFL. Coaching, getting to world-class fighters, getting to sprinters, all these people, okay? His stuff was carrying over everywhere. But what did he do? He never stagnated. The man was standing here at 65, 70 years old, with over 40 years of experience, well over at that point. And what was he doing? He was still trying to innovate. He was always trying to learn. He was at the bleeding edge all the time. Okay? Always. So again, he was always coming up with stuff like, well, if we max out at week 3, if we do the same lift, we start stagnating on the max. So we need to rotate these maxes, and we do it for psychological reasons. We do it to learn to grind. We learn to lift maximally. So we have the max effort method. And it was rotating lifts all the time, rotating lifts, because he found it worked in that environment. Okay, his dynamic effort work and speed work and force production and using the box squat and all these things that he worked with doing. He got to where they started using chains. Okay, and he realized, the change, the contrast weight, the accommodating resistance changes our strength curve, and so it lets us, sustain a longer rate of force production on speed work. Okay, but then he realized bands will do the same thing even more effectively. Right? So then he's like, so then we start adding heavy bands and heavy band tension and riding the bleeding edge with that. But then he starts figuring out, well, stuff works in these same 3-week waves and these 3-week pendulum waves. And if we run the bands longer than 3 weeks, people start getting beat up. They start getting overtrained. So we need to rotate back through them. So he started doing stuff to where he had people run bands for 3 weeks and then chains for 3 weeks. Okay? It's what he did. It's what he did, and it worked. It absolutely worked. It worked amazingly well. Like, to the point, I almost feel like at a certain point I could go back and revisit some of this and just add some bodybuilding work and probably be stupidly strong again. I'm already doing decent. I'm doing okay for an old man. But I'm focusing on bodybuilding. But remembering how all this worked, I remember all this. I've done all these things. I did these things with clients, and it does work. But he was always adjusting these things because he's like, look, we try this and then we get some results, but then people stall at this point, so we have to rotate this, we have to rotate that. And he always experimented with whole teams of people all the time. 7 days a week, he never took time off. It was literally every single day. The man was going in, he was training in the trenches with teams and supervising teams. It was hours and hours every day, 7 days a week for 40 or 50 years straight. But he never stopped learning. He was always like, we have to innovate. We have to find new ways to do things. We have to find ways to get our conditioning up, our GPP up. We have to find ways to be able to do more work and recover from it. We have to learn when to rotate things to avoid overtraining. We have to always be finding ways to produce more force all the time. He never stopped. He just innovated and innovated and innovated. And you'll see that, and he would say, we have to do it this way. You can only handle this from doing it like this. But he started with all that Russian stuff and the Prelipin's chart and all their things, and then he just started adding and accumulating and taking this, entire eclectic system to where he borrowed from everywhere. And before long, he's like, look, we do here, I find that works best. We can handle 5% max effort work. It needs to be true max effort. Rotating lifts. then doing dynamic work for 75% of your training, rotating 3-week pendulum waves against band tension, chain tension, then occasionally running a week then to deload from that where you just run high reps for sets of 8. Okay? And then reacclimate to that. And then he's like, and then 70% is basically bodybuilding work. We just get big. We come in and do lots and lots of pump work and bodybuilding work and isolation. And it worked. It worked extremely well. And it started carrying over everywhere. People have to understand the body of knowledge this man left. Because a lot of people are like, well, that's easy. You know, you could just figure it out reading online. But he didn't. He innovated all of it. He figured this stuff out. What we're reading later is all his accumulated work, and it reached so far. Okay, it reached so far. When you start looking as early as even the 90s, by the late 90s, his work was carrying over to the NFL. People say, what? Do you remember the DeFranco Strong video? He even had it back then called his Westside for Skinny Bastards. He was getting guys through all this stuff through the combine and getting guys better. Then that started carrying. He started getting NFL players in his gym. That carried over to the NFL. The Army Rangers. Again, I had a cousin who was a Ranger. I talked to him about this stuff. I had a client who was a current Ranger in his first year, and he sent me a copy of the PDF of their fitness handbook. It had dynamic work against bands and chains and waves, right? You looked at their gyms, it looked like a Westside. This carried over literally to our military. It carried over to the NFL. It carried over to the UFC. This didn't just stay in powerlifting. The body of knowledge that this man created through his 40 or 50 years of just continuous experimenting and learning and always seeking to find a better way to do things all the time, nonstop. My God, look at the body of knowledge that it produced, that it left us. And look how that's affected all of those things. Okay? Look how it affected all of those things. My God. So when I say stuff like we stand on the shoulders of giants, I'm talking about guys like Louis Simmons. Right? I'm talking about guys like Louis Simmons. I stand on the shoulders of men like that. Because they did all that groundwork. They did all that groundwork that all the rest of us use. Okay? And you have to give respect for that. And if you can't respect that, you don't understand lifting or coaching. Or you don't understand the need to continually innovate. It's critical. It's critical. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.